Welcome back to the Foundry. Have you ever found yourself needing to remove old graphics, vinyl decals? Let's say maybe you bought a truck or a piece of equipment and you need to remove the previous owner's company logo, but you're not sure the best way to go about doing it because, you know, what with all the sticky adhesive and the mess, and you just want to know the quickest, easiest way to get it done. If so, this is for you. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove vinyl decals from a painted surface. And if it's a little noisy, I apologize. I'm under a bridge. Now the paint on this rig is about 15 years old, and if you look close, you can see there's already a lot of streaks and imperfections. But I'm going to do this in a way to minimize making that any worse. There are two types of painted surfaces you're likely to encounter: a clear coated surface and a non-clear coated surface. This is a non-clear coated surface. The clear coated surfaces are a little easier to work with because there's less chance that you could possibly damage the paint. In non-clear coated surfaces, you got to be extra careful because you can take some paint up with the decal. Sometimes that's unavoidable and there's nothing you can do about it. But I'm going to show you how to do it a relatively safe way depending on what you're working with. So the first thing you want to do is apply heat. Heat is your friend when it comes to removing old vinyl graphics. Now these graphics are about 8 years old. They're not cracked and dried out. That would make it quite a bit more difficult, and you'll see some of that if you do anything, you know, if you do this very often. But you approach it the same way. So this particular vinyl, I can tell by touch that it is 6-year calendared vinyl, 3mm vinyl, and this is the most popular graphic material that you'll probably run across, and it's easier to remove than cast vinyl. So the first thing we'll do is apply the heat. I've got a heat gun. This is a Milwaukee heat gun. You could use a hair dryer. You don't want to get it so hot that it starts to bubble up or damage the paint. And I usually do about 2-3 letters at a time. I just want to get it hot enough to where that vinyl gets soft. You have to be careful, because heat guns can actually throw out a significant amount of heat. Next, what you want to do is take your fingernail. It helps if you have long fingernails. If you don't, you might use a little tool. And you just want to pull up the graphic. You do not want to pull down or over, and you certainly don't want to scrape it. And never use a razor blade on a painted surface. All that's going to do is gouge the paint. You want to get the vinyl soft enough to where you can grab it and pull it straight up, and it will take a lot of the adhesive up with it. Now on a clear coated surface or glass, for example, when you pull that graphic straight up, it'll take more of the adhesive up with it than it will on a rougher textured surface like this. So there's still adhesive here, and I'm going to show you how to deal with that in a moment. But right now, I'm just going to keep pulling the vinyl straight up and off of the surface. Now on older graphics, they're going to be a lot more brittle than this. This, even though it's 8 years old, it's still got some, I don't know if you'd call it elasticity, or it's still kind of soft. If you find that your graphic is cracked and super brittle, heat will revive it to some extent, but you're just going to have to work with it, pulling it off of there, and it's just going to take longer, but you still do it the same way. And you might ask, why not use something like a spatula and scrape it off? Well, the main reason for that is what it will do is it will leave behind a lot more of the adhesive, making your job a little bit harder later. It'll leave it behind and it'll smear it like snot, and it just makes it that much more difficult to clean up after you get your vinyl removed. Once you get the vinyl removed and you're left with the adhesive that needs to be removed next, you'll want to use some type of adhesive remover. And in this case, I have something called orange peel. It's a non-toxic multi-purpose solvent. It's kind of thick, almost like a really lightweight oil, but it works really well. I've also used something called Graphics Gone. It works pretty good. You can use lighter fluid. There's a number of different things you can use, but the most important thing is that whatever you use doesn't damage the paint, because you don't have a clear coat on this surface to protect this paint. So you don't want to use something that's too harsh. And all I do, I'll take this orange peel, douse it on a paper towel, pretty liberal amount, and I dab it all over this adhesive. Now I've already did a test spot, so I know this stuff's not going to hurt the paint. You want to dab it. You don't want to wipe it. You want to dab it. If you wipe it, you'll smear that mess all over the place. It's going to make it that much harder to get off. I'll show you here in a second. So you dab it on there and you let it set. Now I'm out in broad daylight, which is not ideal for this type of task. It's just where the machine's located, because you don't want your solvent to dry before it soaks into the adhesive. The whole point of dabbing it on there and waiting a little bit is to let it permeate that adhesive and start breaking it loose. So dab it on there and wait just a minute or two. Now once you've let it set up to the point that the adhesive gets very gooey, not to the point that the solvent is dried, you take a sharp plastic squeegee or spatula and you just simply hold that sharp edge to the surface and roll that adhesive off of there. And it's a gooey mess, no doubt about it. So bring plenty of paper towels and whatnot. Now it may take a couple of passes of doing that routine, once, twice, 3 times, whatever it takes to get all the adhesive off. Then I take some Windex or some application fluid and I just spray down the surface, give it a good cleaning. That'll help remove the solvent you used and any excess dirt or whatever else to get you ready for your reapplication of a new decal, if you're even putting one on. All right, so you'll notice that you can still see the lettering. There's nothing you can do, well, there's very little you can do about that, because what has occurred, the paint under that graphic was protected by the graphic. The paint around it over the years has eroded. So sometimes you'll even feel some stepping. In this case, it's still pretty smooth, but you can definitely see where the graphic was. About the only thing you can do about that is take some rubbing compound or polishing compound and maybe a buffer and just hit this whole area or this whole panel, and that will blend that in a little bit. On clear coated surfaces, it's even actually harder to deal with. You notice it less, but you'll feel a stepping in the clear coat, and there's very little you can do about that. Everybody just needs to know on the front end, that's just the nature of it. But you can use some rubbing compound and get it pretty good, and certainly good enough to put a new or different graphic over the top of it. And you know, from a few steps away, you're not going to notice it. It's not a big deal. You may notice I've got some application tape on here. That doesn't have anything to do with this process. I'm just covering up the previous owner's information. But anyway, that's how I do it on a painted surface. And you'll notice there's no gouges in this paint. That's why I didn't use a razor blade. And I think it'll turn out pretty well. Next, we have a decal on a clear coated surface. Same calendared 6-year rated 3mm vinyl. And it's been on this truck probably a little less than 10 years. We'll start by applying some heat. Get it good and soft. And we'll just pull it up. You can see the adhesive trying to come up with the graphic. That's what you want. See, it's leaving behind less than it did on that previous type of surface. And we got some small pieces. Again, you want to heat it up until it's soft. You don't want to get it so hot that it's mushy, or it won't stay together long enough to cool up. Pull straight up. See, when it's really good and hot like that, it just comes right off. And this vinyl's been on here for just shy of 10 years probably. It's actually held up really well for 6-year rated vinyl. I don't know what brand it is. Well, these little small ones are kind of tedious, but you do it the same way. The older graphics, they tend to get dry and they get very brittle, and heat helps that to some extent. And if we're talking really old graphics that are just very cracked and brittle, you just got to do what you got to do. They may not pull up like this. You might have to employ a scraping method. Just do something that's not going to damage, or that minimizes any damage to the underlying substrate, whether it's paint or whether it's clear coated or not. And never use a razor blade on a painted surface. I can't think of there ever being a good time to use a razor blade on a painted surface. All right, that part's done. Now we're going to take our adhesive remover. Uh-oh, a little bit much. That's okay. And we dab it on. Now you have to take care in this next part, because you don't want to scratch the clear coat on the truck. Now this truck's white, and even if I did scratch it a little bit, you probably wouldn't even notice it, but that's not the point. The point is to minimize any of that on a customer's vehicle especially, or dark vehicles where you can really see the scratches. So you want to use something like, in this case I've got this squeegee I don't know what kind of material it is. I don't think it's Teflon, but it's something similar. And you want to make sure that edge is smooth. You don't want a rough edge because that will tend to scratch the surface a little more. With a good smooth edge on a piece of material like this, it really doesn't scratch the clear coat. And I need a little bit more adhesive remover. Now another thing, on a cleared surface, you can get by with a little bit of wiping that you couldn't get by with on the non-clear coated surface, because this is so much smoother and slicker. On a textured surface, you go to wipe it, it just smears crap everywhere, and it really doesn't work out good. But you can see that worked out pretty good. Smooth as can be. So I'll go over the rest of it with this and get the big stuff. And I'll come back and buff the rest of it off. Now when I'm confident I have all the adhesive off, I use something like Windex or some application fluid. And I just clean up the whole area and clean any remaining solvent off the surface. And just like that, in a few short minutes, that graphic is gone. Now, let's take a look. I don't know if you can see it in the camera. If you hit the light just right, you can kind of tell where it used to be. That's going to be, that's normal. There's really not much you can do about that. At this point, the only thing you can try to do about that is to get you some polishing compound, some buffing compound, and buff this panel, and it may minimize that to some extent. But you just need to know that that's going to happen on a painted surface. But this turned out very well. You can see I didn't scratch anything. I didn't gouge the paint. I didn't use a razor blade. I used a plastic composite squeegee and some clear coat safe solvent, and it took care of this perfect. Now something else I wanted to bring up, and that is a rubber eraser. It's kind of like a pencil eraser, but you chuck it in a drill and then you take and run it across adhesive. That rubber eraser spins and it rolls up the adhesive. So this truck used to have a bumper right across here, a piece of trim, and about 10 years ago I took that trim off, and there was a good thick line of adhesive on there, and that rubber eraser worked fairly well for that. I generally would not recommend it for a graphic though, because the graphic adhesive is so thin, all that eraser does is smear it everywhere. Another thing the eraser will do on clear coat, it will put micro abrasions in the clear coat, and when you stand back from a distance, it's very dull. The panel where you use that eraser is very dull. It's almost like it melts the clear coat to an extent. So I don't use those when I remove graphics. I don't recommend those. The difference is the adhesive on the trim panels is a thicker adhesive, and it rolls off better than this really thin vinyl adhesive. So I just thought I would say something about the eraser. And now I can either put a new decal on or leave this the way it is. And that's pretty much that. So hope this has been helpful. Hope I've, let me know if you're in the sign business or the graphics business, or you have some experience with this, and you have some tips or tricks that I didn't cover. Drop us a line in the comment section and let us know about it.
And if you got anything valuable from this, hit that like button. Until next time.